Here we go. All right, so domain's a big topic in this course, and it's a huge topic in the next course. So for those of you that don't like domain, sign up for 1106 and 1107. Don't take 1105. Because in 1105, you do domain the entire time. Like, it starts with chapter 2, and then if you don't figure it out, you can do it in chapter 3. If you don't figure it out, you can do it in chapter 4. If you don't figure it out, then it's okay. You can still do it in chapter 5. Some people still struggle. We can do it again in chapter 6. And if you still struggle at that point, then we just do it next semester. Okay? So domain is going to be huge. I would think that you would see a domain problem on the final, maybe 2, maybe 3. Right? So thank you, David. So for this one, how do you find a domain when you have a fraction? You have to set the denominator equal to 0. Say 3x equals negative 4, divide by 3, x equals negative 4/3. Okay. And then how do you write the domain? X cannot be negative 4/3. That makes the denominator 0. That causes a problem. The answer is negative infinity to negative 4/3. Union negative 4/3 to infinity. Now notice a couple things. That if I were making this multiple choice, you're fortunate on the final exam that I didn't get to write it entirely. Because if I had written it, number one, you'd have E, none of the above, which is the great equalizer in multiple choice. When you have to have none of the above or all of the above, that really just screws with your head for a while. Okay, so there is no none of the above, so you only get 4 choices. One of those 4 choices has to be right. So somewhere, that answer must show up. Now, what other answers show up? If I were writing it, this one would show up. I'd put a bracket on there. Just because I know that about a third of the students don't really understand the difference between brackets and parentheses anyway. You just kind of use them arbitrarily, or you just go with some kind of bracketus. You know, just kind of mold those two together and hope you get lucky and get credit. Okay? The bracket means you want to include the value. The parenthesis means you don't want to include it. And in this case, we don't want to include it, so we would go with answer A. Now, the other answer I would put, very common answer, negative 4/3 to infinity. Okay? I would put that. Why? Because some of you, oh, and then by the way, the other answer, you always have to put it. Jesus. Okay? Negative infinity to infinity. But the reason why this answer is such a popular answer is because of this question. Now with this one, notice that the square root has to either be positive or 0. And so that requires you to set 2x plus 3 greater than or equal to 0. 2x is greater than or equal to negative 3. And then x is greater than or equal to negative 3/2. But where does the problem come from? The problem lies in the way students deal with these questions. You see, a lot of people won't set it greater than or equal to 0 like I did here. A lot of people will just do this. 2x plus 3 equals 0. Okay? Then they get 2x equals negative 3. Then they get x equals negative 3/2. The problem is when they get x equals negative 3/2 here and x equals negative 4/3 there, they don't really understand how the answer is supposed to be formed. They just know that it's got to include that number somehow. And so then what happens to a lot of students is when they start looking at the choices, they go like this. Okay, which one looks familiar to me? Which one have I actually seen before? And that's why this answer comes out to be a common answer, is this is the one you've seen last. Okay, does that make sense? So understand why this answer shows up. This is basically just the positive side of the answer. You see, this is the positive side here, this is the negative side. And when you see two pieces, that's the way you should think of it. A positive side, a negative side. If you see a bracket, then you have the positive side, you have a negative side, and the bracket means you also have 0. So when you see two pieces, you probably ought to think of it, at least on some level, and it's not entirely correct, but on some level as kind of having a positive side and a negative side. And if you keep that in mind, then you can ask yourself questions like, well, can this be positive and negative? Yes, I need two sides. Okay. Can this be positive and negative? No, it can't be positive and negative. It has to be positive, so you only need one side. Okay. And again, people say, well, there are ways you can trick it and make it not do that. Yeah, I mean, if I want to be a jackass, I probably could come up with something that would confuse you, but I'm not trying to do that. Not this term. Okay. So write your final answer, -3/2 to infinity. Okay. Any questions on that? How do you simplify this? JK. Let me pause here while you enjoy a message from Chick-fil-A. All right, so the question that was just raised is two things. Number one, why are we using a union? And that answer is because we can use positive numbers and we can use negative numbers. So to combine those together, you have to put a union in between them because they're just two different sets. The other question that came up, which was a really good question, was why the parentheses and not the bracket? And the answer is because while we can use positive numbers, we can use negative numbers. If we put a bracket on it, we're saying it's okay to use 0. So notice in this case, it's not okay to use 0, and therefore this answer here is not right. Okay? Now, if you'll notice here, I do use a bracket. Why? Because it is okay to plug in 0. You see the square root of 0 is 0. So that's okay, we can do that. And so the bracket indicates that it's okay to put in 0. So that's what the bracket's indicating. Okay? We straight? All right. Cube root, -27 squared. The cube root of -27 is -3. Square that, we'll get -3 times -3 is +9. Okay. This is kind of a throwback. Way back. This is like third week of class back. Okay? That seems like so long ago. I don't know about y'all, but it seems like it was forever. -2 minus 7 over 4 minus -3. -9 over negative and negative become +7. So -9 over 7. Okay. All right, any questions on that? All right, so in order to solve a problem like this, you have two options. Okay, you either A, go to the quadratic formula, which I'll write that down for you just in case you don't have it. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you either go to that, or, that says or, by the way, you factor. So Luke, when you saw that problem, did you think quadratic formula or factor? Okay, so we would like to try to factor it, if it would factor. Well, if that factors or not. Let's find out. Let's just try. We'll just throw it out there. 3x plus 2, 2x minus 3. Let's see if that will get us where we need to be. 4x, negative 9x. Oh my gosh. The stars have aligned for us again. It factors. Once it factors, you got to be pretty happy. I mean, as happy as you can ever get about math problems. I know for some of you that's not very happy, but you got to be pretty happy because then you can just say 3x plus 2 equals 0. 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. 3x equals negative 2. 2x equals 3. We're just solving these independently, right? X equals negative 2/3, and x equals 3/2. Okay. Now, the answer to the question from earlier, which was, well, how do I know if I have to factor, or how do I know whether it would do quadratic formula? And the answer is, look at the answers. You see, on a multiple choice test, it should be pretty easy to tell. If you look at the answers and you see A equals 5, negative 1. B equals negative 2/3, 3/2. C equals 3/2 and negative 3/2. D equals 0.6. If you see the answers and they look like this and there's no square roots, then you know that this problem would have factored. Okay? And the people who write the final are really a lot nicer than I am. Because here's the reason why. They don't mix it up. They don't give you a few of these and then some square roots. Like if it required the quadratic formula, it would go like this. A, 5 plus square root of 7 over 2. B, 7 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. C, 6 plus or minus the square root of 15 over 3. Like, all the answers would involve square roots. And when that happens, you go like this. I bet you I'm supposed to use that quadratic formula thing. How do you know? It has a square root in it, so I'm assuming I must have to do that. Okay? Again, if I were doing it, I'd give you a couple of these and then a couple of these. And that way you just kind of never know for sure. Okay? Huh? And right now, this is going like this. Well, he ain't writing it. Okay? So that's how you can typically tell, Gene, do you need the quadratic formula or do you not? Okay? These answers are a lot easier to plug back in if you wanted to do so. I mean, if you were feeling skippy, you could plug these back in too. No, you're good. Okay? Now, with that being said, let's do quadratic formula for this. Let's do, and I'll just say it's quadratic formula. Let's do 3x squared plus 7x minus 1 is equal to 0. Let us use the quadratic formula and solve that. We are back live, and I will be turning this problem over. It's the quadratic formula. I'll be turning this over to Luke. Wait a minute. There's some discussion about a shortcut. Oh, you have plus or minus? Yeah. That's fine. All right, next voice you'll hear is Luke, the fastest player on the baseball team.
All right. Is it recorded? All right. We got 3x squared plus 7x minus 1 equals 0. And Mr. Dryer said you can't factor it, so you can't factor it. So then we use the quadratic formula, which is negative b, which is negative 7. Why doesn't it work? Why isn't this working?
You want to use red?
Yeah.
Okay.
negative 7 plus or minus square root.
Might speak up just a little bit.
Then you get negative 7 plus or minus square root of 7 squared minus 4 times 3 and times negative 1. All over 2a, which is